Good morning. Today is the 9th of Kislev, the 22nd of November. It's the Yortzeit of the Middler Rebbe, and we're in Mitzvat Tzitz in Derech Mitzvotecha. And what we want to look at now is this whole issue of encompassing light and inner light, or makif and pnimi, or makif or pnimi. Let's look here at the bottom of 28. ושני הקדמות האלו התבררו בהקדים הקדמה שלישית שיעדתי לך תחילה. So to understand the two introductions or two prefaces that we had regarding why it's so important for the neshama to come down into this world, and the second was about reward and punishment, and about the concept of tchias hamesim, of resurrection of the dead, and why that's an important part of it. So now he wants to tell us about a third preface. What does it mean when the Torah tells us, not the Torah itself, the Ramban says that when it says Bereshis bara, that Hashem created, he says that the verb to create means something from nothing. Ex nihilo.
Who says that?
Ramban.
Yeah.
Ramban in the Torah, he says there's no other verb in Hebrew that means that. That's why, because we find in the story of creation that there are three different verbs used. Bara, yatzar, and asa. He created, he formed, and he made. And we also find another verb which is he spoke, he said. But that we understand is not the creation itself. We understand that these three verbs, each one means something different. So how are they different? So says the Ramban, they're different because to create, bara, means something from nothing. And this is an established principle in Torah thought. And we explained that the Baal Shem Tov said that his soul couldn't come down into the world until there was some dissipation of the Greek spirit, that the world, the physical matter, is eternal. And that really what happened when the world was created, they don't think that the world wasn't created. They think that the reality that we have now was created. But it wasn't created in the sense of God bringing everything into being, but rather there was matter that already existed. And then God added the form. And said the Baal Shem Tov, my soul couldn't come down into the world until this was at least somewhat dissipated from the world. And in the late 1600s, early 1700s, most of the world already didn't think this. There wasn't. Where did it come from? From them? Yeah. Logic.
Oh, where did the Greeks say this matter came from?
Nowhere. It's like when you ask us, where did Hashem come from? They would give the same answer. So there were already many proofs that showed that this was impossible. But in any case, so the Torah point of view has always been, or at least as far as I know, has always been that creation is total. It's not that something existed before. Maimonides contended with this. There's a famous chapter 25 in part 2 of his Guide to the Perplexed. And there he deals with this whole question about there being matter that was eternal or not eternal. And eventually he comes to the conclusion that he would like to adopt the Greek point of view if he could, but Torah says differently. So as long as Torah says differently, then he succumbs to Torah. But if he finds some way to interpret Torah differently, then he would like to adopt the Greek point of view, because in Maimonides' time it seemed that it was a more philosophically logical conclusion.
Was that polemics on his part? Apologetics?
A lot of people say so.
Okay.
But unfortunately they say it was apologetics in the other direction. They say it was apologetics towards the Jews. They say, no, he really thought that the world was like the Aristotle says.
Wow.
But that's nonsense. The Rambam, of course, because the Torah says something else, so he says my logic is second, first of all, what the Torah says. Okay, so now there's this concept of something coming out of nothing. Bria yesh me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin, something out of nothing. What does that even mean? So says the Tzemach Tzedek, I have to explain this to you, because it's not what you think it is. Okay, so what does it mean? And this pertains, he says, Hen b'sheshet yemei bereshit, והן בתמידיות, כמאמר מחדש בטובו בכל יום תמיד מעשה בראשית, כנודע בסוד השבת. This idea of the world coming out of nothing is not just initially, in the 6 days of creation, it's continuous. Because God continuously has to bring the world, has to recreate the world at every moment. Now one is dependent on the other, meaning we're going to see in a moment that the fact that we say that God is recreating the world at every moment depends on the definition of what it means to create something out of nothing. Meaning the moment you accept what this creation out of nothing means, you end up having to say that God recreates the world at every moment. One depends on the other. בכוח הבורא יתברך המחדש מאין ליש, שזהו על ידי שני מיני המשכת החיות ממנו יתברך לעולם. And to understand this, we have to know that God sustains the world using what we call two different paths. There's a path that is for the spirit, and there is a path for the matter. Okay? There's two different ways in which he sustains the world. So let's see them. אחד החיות הנשפע בתוכיות ופנימיות הנמצאים. רצוני לומר שמשיגים אותו בכלים שלהם המוכנים לקבל אותו. He says the first path is what we call inner light, or inner revelation of godliness. And that assumes that there is a vessel that is ready to accept this life force. There has to be a vessel. So once there's a vessel, I put something in it. And what does it mean I put something in it? The examples are, for instance, he says, כמו השכל שהוא נתפס במוח האדם. In the same way that my soul, when it enters my body, when it enters my brain, it creates a mind. That's what it does. The brain is a vessel that is ready to take in the light, meaning the revelation of the soul, and that causes me to have a mind. But if my soul was not inside my brain, so my brain is a piece of very sophisticated but dead tissue. Right? There's nothing in it. Nothing really happens. So that's one example. Another example, וכוח התנועה שנתפס באיברים המתנענעים. And the power of locomotion that is in our mechanical organs. Meaning, in fact, we can walk, we can move, we can do everything that we do. So this is one form of influence or effluence that God gives to the world. And again, it's not that this is it. He's just giving examples. So the examples are like the soul inside the body is like God in the world. So God is revealing himself in the world the same way that the soul reveals itself in the body. ועל דרך זה בנמצאים העליונים, כל אחד ואחד לפי מעלתו. So this is also true about angels. It's also true about everything that's supernal, that's above the mundane realm. There is a light, meaning a revelation of God, that gives them life. But what's the problem here? The problem is, where did the vessel come from? Where's the vessel from? How did the vessel get here? So then he says, והנה אור וחיות זה המתלבש בפנימיות המקבלים, אינו מספיק להבותם מאין ליש. Now this light that we just said, this effluence from God, is not enough to create something from nothing. This is how the Greeks envisioned it. They envisioned that there was an effluence from God, the form, that was added to the matter, that was added to the vessel. That's how they envisioned it. So that is not talking about me'ayin le'yesh. That's not talking about nothing to something. That's talking about something to something. כי בריאה וחידוש האש מאין אינו אלא על ידי כוח הבלתי בעל גבול. Why? Because here we assume that there's a vessel, and so all that's needed is something to limit, that's why we call it the limited side of God's effluence, to limit God's effluence and to put it into the vessel. That's all that needs to happen. So you have let's say you're at the Niagara Falls, and you want to put a cup into the falls to get a cup of water. So can you do it? Maybe you can. Maybe there's a way that you can take the water there, and we do that. And you put it into a little pipe, and then at the end you put a faucet, and then here I am. I'm drinking from the Niagara Falls. So that is what we call the inner light. it's a limiting. It limits and limits and limits until you get something that can be held inside the vessel. But again, it doesn't explain the existence of the vessel. ומאחר שחיות זה מתלבש בכלי המקבל אשר הוא מוגבל, איך יהיה בו כוח זה? Sorry, I skipped a line. כי בריאה וחידוש היש מאין אינו על ידי הכוח הבלתי בעל גבול. I didn't explain it. I didn't skip it, but I didn't explain it. But to create the vessel itself, you can't use a limited force. It has to be an infinite force. Why? Why would you say that? Because at first glance, to create a vessel is completely the opposite of being God. Because God is not limited. We just said that. So if he's not limited, how is it possible that he can create something that's limited? So for that we assume, and this was one of the great discoveries of Kabbalah, one might say how to phrase this, how to say this, that in order to create the world, there also has to be not just a limited effluence, but an infinite effluence as well. An unlimited, instead of calling it infinite, we'll call it unlimited. And the unlimited effluence is needed to skip the gap, the gap between the infinite and the finite. To do that, you need something that has no limits. Because when we say limits, it's no restrictions. In my logical thought, there's no way to do this. How do you get from the infinite, something that's infinite, how do you get to something that's finite? How do you actually do that? Anything that the infinite would create would seem to be something that is infinite as well. Everything that would come out of the infinite would seem to be. So here there's an interesting logic that in order to get from the infinite to the finite, you have to have an unrestricted ability. What would it be like? It would be like the sun suddenly sending out packets, small packets of energy in a little box.
That's a limitation.
Right? And the sun can't do it because the sun has no way to do it. So you have to have something that's unrestricted and able to do that.
Yes.
ומאחר שחיות זה מתלבש בכלי המקבל אשר הוא מוגבל, איך יהיה בו כוח זה? So certainly this is not the same thing as the first type of revelation, the first type of effluence that we talked about, because that effluence is limited. So that cannot create the vessel itself. So this is a very interesting statement, because a lot of people know that there's a statement in the Arizal that says, "Mi tabu ta'arot mi tavu hakalim." From the thickening of the light emerged the vessels. But in Chasidus it's explained that this is not talking about the vessels themselves. The vessels themselves have a different path of creation. They're not created from the light. What it means there is that there's an aspect of the vessels that fits the light, the limited light, but not the vessel itself. אלא עיקר ההתהוות וקיום הנמצאים הוא על ידי ההמשכה השנית שממנו יתברך, אשר אינו מתלבש בפנימיות הנמצאים. Because this second effluence is unlimited, it has no restrictions on it, it cannot enter into the creation, into the vessels of creation. It can't be contained inside. What is it? It only creates the vessel itself. So what's an example of this? Somebody told me this yesterday. If I want to understand what is going on in the world, why God is doing what he's doing, so there's an understanding that I have which is based on the limited effluence. And that, okay, I understand what I understand. I think that this is happening because of this is happening because of that. But if I want to understand the ultimate reason, I have a limit on my ability to think, because my thought is only the first type of effluence. It's the inner, integrated effluence. It can only come, whatever's in my brain. And that my brain can only contain the limited. It can't contain the unlimited, the unrestricted. What if the calculation, let's call it a calculation, because it wouldn't be exactly a calculation because it's without restrictions. There's no limits on it. So exactly what would it even mean? So if the real reason why God is doing what he's doing is in the unlimited light, in the unlimited effluence, I have no chance of ever understanding it. I mean, I just have to know my limitations. My limitations are that what I am conscious of normally is only this inner light, the light that goes into my vessel. So that's the most I can understand. And that the Prophet says, "Ki lo machshavotay machshavotechem," my thoughts are not your thoughts, because your thoughts are limited. רוצה לומר, בחוכמתם ובינתם ודעתם, שהרי כוחות נפשיות, שאינן משיגים מהותו ומציאותו כהשגת המוח, את השכל. כי הוא כוח וחיות בלתי מוגבל, אלא הוא אין סוף, כי אור וחיות המאיר, מזיו כבודו יתברך. So he says, the mind and the understanding and the consciousness cannot understand the second type of effluence, because it is unrestricted, unlimited, and the mind has no way to contain it. But this is what we call the infinite life force, and it is what we call the infinite, the Ein Sof. כי הוא אור וחיות המאיר מזיו כבודו יתברך. ואין בערך בעלי גבול לתופסו ולהשיגו. And again, those who are limited, us, our minds, cannot understand the second type of effluence. So we cannot understand, in the end, I translated this as, we cannot understand in the end how matter came into being. What does that mean? That we really can't understand? We have all kinds of theories about how it happened. Even our theories start with something. There's always something at the beginning. It's not just something out of nothing. There's always something from something. If you, as far back as you go, if you follow cosmology, whatever you think of, in the end you have to start with something. To understand how something emerges from nothing, that we don't understand. We can't understand it. והוא המחיה אותם ומוציאם מן העין המוחלט על היש, שהם בו ומעמידם בכל שעה ורגע. And this infinite effluence, and again, this is what we call encompassing light in the end. We say that this is, when we say that we ourselves were made out of two parts. The vessel, let's say for our purposes the body, and the soul. The soul is integrated light. It's limited. It's very interesting that the soul, if you follow this, then the first thing you know about the soul is actually that it's limited, not unlimited. Now everything, the soul also is something that was created. So the soul too has an aspect of the makif, of the encompassing light. But the first thing you think about the soul is inside the body. It's contained, so it's limited. That's why we have two parts of the soul, right? We say the part that we're aware of is the nefesh, ruach, neshama, the three lower parts of the soul. And then we have two makifim. We have two encompassing lights in the soul. What does it mean we have two encompassing lights? It means there are two levels that we can't consciously perceive.
That is the
right. And they allow the soul to even to exist.
But we don't have a conception.
We don't have a conception of it. We only see the products of that existence.
Which are the lowers. Yeah.
Right. Whatever permeates down into consciousness. The same thing is true of the body. We have this is a big test for medicine. So why medicine can never be complete. Because we have an understanding of the inner light. We have an understanding of how the body functions. But since we can't understand how the body comes into being, and I don't mean comes into being how it's again created from the zygotes or from the mother and father. That's not what I'm talking about. So, how does the matter itself? Where does it come from? How is the matter formed? Created, the right word. Something out of nothing. So since I can't understand that, I can never fully understand myself. I can only understand some of the functioning, some of the inner processes that I see. That I can come to some understanding of. But to understand how the whole thing came into being, that I can't understand. So anyway, because of this, now we have something new. ואף על פי ומוציאה מן העין מוחלט על היש שהם בו מעמידם בכל שעה ורגע. So now he doesn't say it so much here. I think he doesn't say it so much here. Maybe later on. Don't remember if he says this. This is the deviation, the departure from creation as philosophy envisions it. Because philosophy is always assuming something from something, there had to be matter to begin with. There had to be something to begin with. Something had to exist. So therefore, they imagine, it's explained in many places, they imagine that you just add a form. So it's like a carpenter takes pieces of wood and he puts his table together. The carpenter can go somewhere else. He doesn't need to stay. You can leave the table, sell it to someone, and it's fine. Nothing will happen to it. Why? Because he started with pieces of wood. He started with something that already existed. He only shaped it. He gave it its form. But he didn't give it its existence. So, because of this, the nations of the world could imagine that God left There's no providence. You don't have to have providence.
Like the carpenter.
Right? You don't have
Instead
to.
of a continual
Right.
creation.
But if you understand that even whatever this is, whatever the something is, has to be brought into being, so it always has to be brought into being.
Yeah.
If for one moment, so with this, there's a joke that we'll end with, that the Rebbe Rayatz told this joke once. It's not exactly a joke. It's a funny story. He says that he heard that there was a Farbrengen with some non-Hasidic rabbis, and it was a very nice Farbrengen, but they drink. And at some point, one of the Hasidim said, L'chaim, that the Rebbe should bless Hashem. The Rebbe should bench Hashem. So everything became quiet, and now it's about to explode. So I don't remember who it was there that saw this, and he had to calm things down. So he said, "Don't hold it against him that he just said this. I'll show you why." He asked him a question. He said to one of the non-Hasidic rabbis, "Tell me, if Hashem wanted to annihilate the world, what would He do?" So the guy thinks a little, and he says, "He'd burn it. He'd drown it, let's say. He'd burn it, whatever." So what do you do with what's left? Well, he has to grind it. Okay, so what do you do with what's left? He has to throw it out into the air. So, okay, but now there's air full of the rest of the world. What do you do? So he thinks he can't come up with anything. What can you do now? So the Chassid said, Hashem like that needs a blessing. If that's the way you understand God, that type of God needs a blessing for good health. Because that's not God.
That's sharp, yeah.
Why? Because if God wants to finish the world, He just doesn't create it. That's all. Because at every moment He's recreating it.
Yes.
So when you take away the will to create, He's finished. There's no world. There's nothing sustaining it except for that. That is only true if you understand something from nothing. And then you understand that it has to happen at every single moment. It has to be all the time. Okay, so we'll end here, and God willing, we'll continue tomorrow.